Welcome to Yell, Fight, Sooie, college football from three friendly-ish rivals.
Welcome to the next to last week of the regular college football season for most of us here at Yell, Fight, Sooie. We are all just
definitely for one of us
sprinting into the last couple of weeks of the season. On the Yell side of things, he's not doing that much yelling. It's Mr. Andy Tom Chesson.
Oh, I yell a lot. Tomorrow I'll be yelling at how bad ESPN Plus streaming is, but
hey, you get a trade-off because you get a rent a win. Excuse me.
I don't know. We're on a 6-game losing streak. They're on a 7-game losing streak. It'll be
33.5 point favorites, and we're going to get there.
Something's got to give.
But we're trying to get to the fight side of things right now. And the fight side is sitting up here with his beautiful background, believing in Sark, Mr. James Christopher.
I believe in Sark, and not just that he exists, as Andy teased me about before we went live. Like, I still believe he's the right guy for the job. I know we're going to get into it, but I still think he is.
See, Andy, that's what happens when a fan base actually likes their coach still. And then I am the Sooie.
Oh, I don't know that the fan base does.
Well,
I do.
You do. Okay. Well, at least a fan likes. And then I am here with the Sooie type of things with a 500 record that feels like it's been a roller coaster. How can it be 5-5 when it feels like we're, I don't know, 19-97 or something like that? I mean, we're just terrible right now, but we're not. From the Arkansas side of things. So guys, let's start off with last week. Andy, watch any good movies last week? How was last weekend for you?
There's a thing, it's called the 7 stages of grief. Appalachian State was shock. And then we had, a couple of weeks with Miami and Arkansas that were denial. And then since then, I've been somewhere between the bargaining and depression. I'm not at acceptance yet. This week might get me there. Maybe, if again, I can get the ESPN Plus streaming app to work, which is always a fun challenge because they don't really care about that platform, even though they'll gladly take your $10 a month for it.
$10 a month. Yeah.
So, I'm happy that we probably should break our 6-game losing streak. I'm happy that the season's almost over. That's about it. Maybe we'll be healthy. Maybe somebody won't die on the field. Maybe we won't have 5,000 portal transfers. Maybe. That's.
Let's hope nobody dies on the field. But I mean, as we look at last week, is there anything, in all seriousness, is there anything A&M takes away from a loss to Auburn at this point in time, or is it just get this season over with, please?
It is one of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 losses by one score. And I know that's a double-edged sword because we've had a couple of wins by one score too, famously goalposts in Dallas. But the team has not been healthy. They've been through 3 quarterbacks. Offensive line play has been a mess, and that has a lot to do with the coach that we hired and his health. Jimbo's inability or lack of desire to recognize that his offensive system needs changes, and you're still a couple balls go right and you're still talking about a much better season than 3-7. There's no way of sugarcoating 3-7. So trying to find positives in it, trying to find a positive in a win or a loss at Auburn, who doesn't have a head coach. Cadillac Williams is Herschel Walkering his way through these last few games, just saying nonsensical bullshit, but loudly, with a lot of energy, and they managed to win. So I guess good for us for giving them that gift so close to Christmas.
Well, I want to come back. I want to talk about Auburn later because they're in the news, as Auburn tends to do. But first, Jim, you actually played a really good team. Well, you yourself didn't, but your Texas Longhorns did. But a team that has not lost this year, hung with them in a close game. How's it feeling in Austin after the TCU game, or what were your thoughts on the TCU game?
So, look, it's disappointing to have kind of wasted what was a brilliant defensive performance. I think the first 6 plays that TCU had were for losses. I mean, they had sacks, they had tackles for loss. I've not seen a defense play like that in a really long time. And it was disappointing you scored 3 offensive points. what I will say is I still believe in playing Quinn Ewers. I still believe I keep using this thing and I swear to God, Andy, the first time I ever heard it was from you, process over product at this point. And look, could I question Sark's play calling? Should he have thrown a few more screens to get it? It seemed like it was a combination of every ball was deep. Ewers at first was high and outside of all of them, and then everyone forgot how to catch. It was very much a perfect storm of suck. But that being said, I still think he's the guy you play because he beat Hudson Card for a reason, and he still is essentially a freshman. And so do I have quibbles about the play calling? I mean, absolutely. But I still think it's the right track. I still think, if you would have told me walking in here that 8-4 was a possibility, I would have taken it. And I wouldn't have cared what the makeup of that was. And I think 8-4 is really possible. So no, I think no matter what, you're going to get to a bowl game. I think it's clearly a step in the right direction. And so I'm not going to freak out over one loss or call for, someone's job or any of that stuff based on what was supposed to be a step in the right direction season, not necessarily a compete for a Big 12 championship season.
Yeah, but you have put yourself in that discussion, at least earlier in the year, even though it may not work out that way. You were there in that talk for a while. And I mean, you're the only one of us three that are sitting here knowing that your team's getting extra practices and getting to a bowl game. You're the only one that's bowl eligible. And I think if we take a look from 3 months ago and look at how this season's gone, one of us, who, is going to not like how this season's turned out at all. I'm got very mixed emotions that aren't that great. You got the most positive story out of all of us here there in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, and look, whenever we do our wrap up of the regular season episode, if Texas loses the next two, I'm going to have to fight very hard to maintain what I think is the correct perspective, right? I don't envision that happening. I think that they have done a pretty good job of not letting a team beat them twice this year, which is, again, not anything. Andy's talking about the losing streak he's on. I think Texas lost its last 6 last year. Like, it was a rough run. And so I still am, I'm trying to look at where's the program now versus last year. That it sucked that it was a big recruiting weekend and they scored 3 points. Yes and no. I mean, the argument could be, well, if I were in there, we would have scored. I mean, you just never know how that's going to play out. But yeah, I mean, I obviously things can still change, but I'm still feel much better about the program than I did this time last year.
Yeah, and we talked about this somewhat last Saturday when the three of us are chatting during the games. I mean, each of our teams scored 10 points in the game.
How did we even score 10?
Arkansas lost 13-10 to LSU, was right there in it. After a 2-point loss to Liberty, we can look at Arkansas. Same thing. These one-score losses, these end-of-game losses, the balls that went Arkansas's way last year and got them to a Florida Bowl now have us at 5-5 because they're bouncing the other way against us. But I do think that weather really did play an issue in a lot of the offenses last weekend. Especially in the South, we had you had your first big cold front move through. It was windy as hell.
Yeah, it was real windy in Austin. It was real windy.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that absolutely helped out defenses last week because it did come along at the end of the week. It's not like the offenses were practicing in that, and I mean, just your muscles tighten up when it's cold. It's just a fact of what our bodies do. So I don't know how much that played into it, but it sure seems like cold weather games they have more of a propensity to be a defensive headbutting battle. And that felt like more of what we all got last weekend.
If I'm going to pick at something though, I think the problem for Ewers with Texas in that game, from what I could tell, TCU's got a really good defense and probably played the best defensive game against Sark's offense this year. And that includes Alabama. And I think the score was reflective of that. The cold weather certainly helped, but Ewers, to Jim's point, has played now, 6 games since his junior year of high school. Meaningful snaps matter. That experience matters. And you're running into a team in TCU who's one of the great stories in college football this year, And as much as I don't like TCU personally, I think it's fantastic that that team has a chance to be in the playoffs, because college football, as we've discussed a lot, need teams like TCU to step up and be in the college football playoff discussion versus it constantly being Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Notre Dame.
Ohio State. Don't forget the
Or yeah,
Ohio
but it's
State,
one of 5 teams every year.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a great story. I think Texas is undergoing growing pains. I think A&M's had issues with health and quarterback and coaching. And Arkansas, right, wrong, or indifferent, doesn't have the same talent they had last year and has run into a lot of bad luck that last year they ran into good luck. So there's different stages of why all of our teams are where they are. Texas has the best story by far. I would gladly trade places with them right now because 3-7 sucks. But it's been an interesting season.
Well, and I know that Scott's going to move us on in a minute, but just to your point, and and Andy and I, Scott, we talk about this. We are really not fans of the sort of those sites like Burn Orange or Orange Bloods or whatever.
Right.
I think we could have Andy and I could have a competition between who has the biggest asshole, Jeff Ketchum or Billy Lucci, and it would be a draw and everyone would lose. But just looking at Burn Orange Nation, the headline is "Now's the time for Texas to salvage its season." I mean, that just seems to me hyperbolic and knee jerky.
Yeah.
But isn't that a lot of emotional preparing for maybe losing to Baylor? Because there's a lot that goes into the potential of losing to Baylor. No matter what team Baylor puts on, and Scott, no matter what team or who's coaching Baylor puts on the field, it's still losing to Baylor.
Right.
Well, you have to also,
and it doesn't feel good. And so I think a lot of their fan base, like my fan base would be doing, is mentally preparing for, well, if we lose to Baylor, that's not great. So if we lose, I'm just going to go ahead and accept that that's going to happen. But then if we win, I'm pleasantly surprised. And it's not the best way to go through life. It isn't how I go through a lot of baseball season most years, but I think that's a lot. It's just the stupid psychology of being a fan and preparing yourself for the worst and then hoping you're wrong versus
I think it's more than
side of it. The opposite side of it is you're running through being South Carolina and saying, we're going to win the national championship every year until we lose a lot of games every year. But next year,
Spencer Rattler.
There's always next year. Spencer Rattler, and now he's been mentioned. I do think it's more than Baylor because Texas also has Kansas this week, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit too. And given recent history with Kansas, Texas fans are I would imagine, are a little on edge.
No way Sark loses to Kansas 2 years in a row. I will bet my house.
All I know is we were losing to Kansas before it was cool.
Hey, yeah. And I hear the wind blows up in Kansas. But no, guys, we talk about TCU. TCU is an undefeated team. TCU is a great story. We can talk about the teams that historically make the playoff. Does not look like Alabama is going to make it. Shockingly, I'm not saying no yet because there is still a path for them to get there, but it's a very narrow path at this point. But Georgia looks great. Ohio State and Michigan, one of those two are going to beat the crap out of each other here in a couple of weeks. TCU's got a real path to it, but can they do it remains to be seen.
And I think the thing with TCU is its example of like TCU is less talented than Texas, but it's all seniors. To Andy's point earlier, these are all guys who have played a lot of football. That's right. When that game got close, they didn't blink and Texas did. And that's where it was.
Yeah, watching TCU because I've caught a few of their games this year. They don't do any one thing all that well. They just stay in it. To your points, guys. I mean, they just stay in it. They don't go away, and they're there at the end. And Max Duggan impresses me as a quarterback. I don't think we'll ever see him play on a Sunday, but he's a really good college quarterback. So from there, I now kind of want to tie this into something that Andy dealt with last week, and that is, and we were talking about Cadillac Williams losing to Auburn, and Auburn, losing their minds on the field. Cadillac Williams is so very happy, but Cadillac Williams is not the long-term answer. It's rumored. It's said that Ole Miss is trying to lock down Lane Kiffin with a huge deal because the folks at Auburn are about to come calling with apparently a Mack truck full of cash for Mr. Kiffin. What are our thoughts on? There's always the hot stove, right? There's always hot seats, I should say, in college football. Auburn's guy's gone. That seems to be the biggest coaching opportunity. Lane Kiffin to Auburn. What are our thoughts, gentlemen? Or is it somebody else?
I think it very well could be Lane Kiffin, and I think it's a couple of things. Ole Miss, for all their success in the last decade, is not seen as a destination job. And so
Right.
it is a job that you could cherry pick a good coach from. And unfortunately for Ole Miss, they've had Hugh Freeze, and he had his issues with, burner phones and strippers. You had Matt Luke for a couple of seasons, who nobody was trying to recruit to do anything but coach an offensive line. And now you've got a coach worth something again, and he's going to get cherry picked most likely. Ole Miss doesn't historically have the resources to hold on to those kind of guys. And Auburn does, and they're desperate to make a splash. And they've got a new AD who has as I learned Saturday, has a 58-point plan to rebuild the AD, blah, 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 blah. That's going to start with having a big name head coach who can win games with whatever talent he has. And whatever you think about Lane Kiffin, and I know he's not terribly popular in Los Angeles or Knoxville or parts of Florida, Joey Freshwater, the legend lives on. He is still the kind of coach that if you give him a set of players, he's going to figure out how to win games with that set of players. It doesn't really matter where they were recruited, how good they are. Really, I think his system is driven by a quarterback who is accurate. But beyond that, he can draw up an offensive scheme to score points on just about anybody. And he's done that throughout his career. And I think that's what Auburn's going to have to do initially to show some momentum so they can start building up their recruiting, because it's fallen off a lot. I don't think they're quite as desperate, or quite as far off as some schools might be in their situation, because they can point to, look at these facilities, look at these resources, look at our NIL deals, and now we've got a head coach to put it all together. Come join and be part of the team that brings us back. That's a story that every head coach gets to experience when they get new coach bounce. But Auburn's got to make that splash, and I think he's the most logical guy that's available. I don't think hiring Gary Patterson, for instance, who appears to be headed to Nebraska, makes that same kind of splash. And he's probably the next most successful head coach that's sitting out there waiting for a job.
It's really the way to do it, right? But go be an analyst somewhere. So the thought, but you think about the past history with Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin, that would also fit the MO of Auburn wanting to stick it to Alabama
100%.
right there, because Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin as the head coaches of Alabama and Auburn sounds like a remake of the Sparks video from the 70s. This town ain't big enough for the both of us.
I would assume there's going to be some trees in Auburn, Alabama dying
Jim,
every year.
Is the state of Alabama big enough to hold the egos of Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban?
I'm still over here trying to figure out how many lives Lane Kiffin has, because it seems like this dude, is he just going to try to coach in every single SEC school? Because, how many will this be if he goes to Auburn? 3?
He's Tennessee,
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. He was the assistant coach at Alabama.
Offensive coordinator.
If we want to tie it into his dad too, the legendary Monty Kiffin, he was an assistant coach at a lot of places in the SEC also, including Arkansas.
I don't know what it is. I've always looked at Lane Kiffin as like this little twerp, so I don't know why. I just
Joey Freshwater is a thing.
Joey Freshwater's a real thing. Yeah.
I just feel like it's interesting with Alabama. I know it's too early to say, is this the decline of Nick Saban in Alabama? And probably isn't. And I'll look pretty knee jerky with that, but it does make you wonder. It does seem like NIL has leveled the playing field in a way that there's a reason why he was freaking out about it, right? I think it'll be good for college football. Again, I don't understand how Lane Kiffin keeps getting hired. I know he's a good coach, but I don't know. It's always shocked me that he keeps getting hired.
He's traveling to Fayetteville this weekend too, so I'm hoping that all the honeys on Dixon Street are resisting the urge to walk up to that 50-year-old Joey Freshwater with a little extra chin.
Jim, I think it's as simple as, would you dance with the devil in the pale moonlight? That's Lane Kiffin. All the baggage that's coming with him, but he's going to win games. And so where's your soul at? Does the winning games mean more than everything else? The other part with Auburn is no matter how good or bad Lane Kiffin is, the odds of him being there in 5 years are pretty small, just based on his career.
Right.
And it's not by the school's choices that he's ever left. I can't remember a school. I think USC probably fired him.
USC asked him.
But other than that,
he definitely bailed on them for USC, right? Was that the flow?
Yeah.
But the rest of his stops has been he's gotten out before bad things have happened. And I fully see that happening again with Ole Miss this year, whether it's Auburn, which is where I think he ends up, or some other school that opens up between now and then. I just don't see him being in Oxford next fall.
I think the storyline so my personal opinion is, while I would love to see him stay at Ole Miss and actually build something there, because I do think Lane Kiffin has matured as a coach. He's still got the jerk quality. He's still gonna tweet something out. But if you're not following his dog's Twitter feed, guys, trust me, it's worth the follow. He's brilliant.
But the fact that he's a head coach of an FBS Division I team that's 15th in the country and his dog has a Twitter tells you everything you need to know about him.
But that's the way you got to recruit nowadays. In many cases, I do think the storyline of him going to Auburn and he and Nick Saban being in the same state and caught like that's too good to pass up. So I really hope it happens. Also this week, and I did not mention this to you guys beforehand, but the SEC is apparently saying that when they come over, when Oklahoma and Texas, when Texas comes over and brings a broke ass neighbor Oklahoma with them, with the inability to pay $80 million and get in the SEC, going to drag them over. But one division, 16 teams, you will play every team every other year, basically. You play within a 2-year period to pay everybody. You play everybody.
It's still the same model that we had brought up here. So you're going to have 3 permanent rivals in this matchup. But Arkansas's 3, my 3, Texas's 3 aren't going to be the same group.
Right.
Although we'll all play. A&M will play Texas. Texas will play Arkansas. A&M won't play Arkansas except for every other year. Home and different. But the good news for the students, the good news for the fans is that you will play every school home and away every 4-year period.
I'm pretty sure, given historically how the SEC has treated Arkansas, that our permanent rivals will be Texas, Georgia, and Alabama. I'm pretty certain that's the way it will work out. While A&M will be given permanent rivals of LSU, Vanderbilt, and South Carolina.
I have on pretty good authority, and certainly all this can change, that we are Texas, LSU, and Mississippi State. Which, if you're an A&M fan over the last 10 years, you don't necessarily love the matchup with Mississippi State because they, no matter what team you put on the field, they tend to beat us a lot.
It's Jackie Sherrill Bowl.
Yeah, all the time. And it's, they're battling for the Battle of Maroon or whatever fake trophy we're going to create out of that. I worry about South Carolina because they're going to get to keep that Bonham trophy and we won't get to get it back for 3 or 4 years.
So then Texas, who are Texas's 3 permanent teams? That'd be
OU and Arkansas.
OU, Arkansas, and
A&M.
Jim, how do you feel about that? Those are 3 battles. You're gonna. I mean, not that every SEC game isn't going to be tough to some point, but still, Oklahoma definitely, A&M definitely, Arkansas definitely. I get it.
I'm the kind of sports fan that says my favorite Astros game is 15-0, and 10 of those runs were scored in the first inning. So, from a Jim perspective, yeah, it's nerve-wracking to think that those are 3 dogfights. I don't think OU is going to bounce back very quickly. And I don't know that one of the things I think I've been very impressed with Sark is it does seem like he's building teams for the SEC, not necessarily for the Big 12. I do believe that's why he was hired. I believe all of that. Obviously A&M is going to always be a dogfight, but the step aside guy, I love the historicalness of this. Like, we can look forward to in all these matchups, games from the 50s being shown, as we lead into it. Like, I love that. I love that there's a long history, obviously with OU, obviously with A&M, but also with Arkansas that we really haven't seen since the Southwest Conference broke up. I mean, we should just call it Southwest Conference Light and rock and roll and go for it. I love it.
The Southwest Conference Division, I like it.
And
again,
I like it a lot.
we don't want Baylor showing up thinking they get games. OU is interesting to me because part of their sales, and they do recruit nationally, and being in the SEC certainly is going to help their recruiting even more than they already are successful at it. But I could see a scenario where they kind of go the way of Nebraska, because they're now only going to be able to guarantee their players one game in Texas every year. And maybe not even that if A&M and OU aren't permanent rivals. So their recruiting bread and butter, regardless of how many running backs they get from California, has always been pulling Texas kids out of the Dallas Metroplex area.
Well, and to your point, now that you're all in the SEC, you've always been recruiting against Texas. You're now recruiting against A&M again, but now you're also recruiting more directly with LSU. And so in many,
and Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Like we
do a lot of pulling from there. Yeah.
So if you are going to basically be having to play the same competition no matter where you go, because you used to be able to sell the Big 12 on, as long as we beat Texas, we're going to be in the playoff. Now it's a much more difficult situation. And I think with your team in some degree of disarray, I don't know how long it takes. I think Nebraska is a really probably apt comparison.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point also, because Arkansas struggled when we first came over to the SEC for that exact same reason, Jim, because we would dip into Texas for a ton of talent. Well, now when we joined the SEC, A&M wasn't there with us. We're not playing anybody in Texas. And it does change the recruiting model, because you want to go into Jimmy's and John's homes in Texas and say, hey, guys, mom and dad are going to get to come see you because we're going to play games in your state.
You have to keep mom happy. And if you can tell mom you can still come see your kid 6 times a year, that's a big deal.
Well, that's
OU's not going to be able to do that anymore.
Andy, that's precisely why Texas never wanted to play A&M, because it's like, why give them the added recruiting advantage of saying you at least will have one road game in Texas all the time? I mean, it wasn't because we were afraid to lose. It's because it was a recruiting strategy thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. If we just played these games on paper, then all of our years are a lot better anyway. We could just we'll recruit the best players, and then
I would have loved to play this season on paper. Can we go back and do that?
We were playing for the mythical national championship, and
nobody gets injured on paper.
But talking about paper, we look at paper and we see this weekend's games coming up. So I'll start off with Arkansas coming off the 13-10 loss, in which we went through 2 backup quarterbacks, one that couldn't throw and one that couldn't run. That combines with 10 points against the LSU team that is really coming around. I'll tip a cap to Brian Kelly. I did not think it's going to work out there long term, but he's making it look really good this year, and Brian Kelly's coaching them well. But Arkansas now gets Ole Miss. We get Lane Kiffin. Great. On the heels of a loss to Alabama. Great. Going to be fun in Fayetteville. Arkansas at 5-5, getting to play Ole Miss. We've either got to beat Ole Miss this weekend or Missouri next week in Columbia in bitter cold, where it's supposed to be snowing and sleeting and winding. All the biggest words, all the big words like winding.
It's my favorite Beatles song, The Long and Winding Road.
I love it. Love the song. I thought that was by the Association. Everybody knows it's winding. I made a Sparks reference, Association reference.
Nice.
Yeah, we're getting there. What's on tap this week, Jim? Let's start with you, because you get to play a real team this weekend, like we do.
I do think some of the shine of Kansas has come off since the beginning. They've had a couple losses. I tend to agree with Andy in this one. I don't, Texas is a 10-point favorite, which I know that doesn't mean anything, but I don't know that I think Texas is going to lose to Kansas 2 years in a row. And I think it's a stupid reason to pick someone, but I do think that we've seen Quinn Ewers learn from previous mistakes pretty well. He seems to be pretty coachable. He had a horrendous game against Oklahoma State, followed it up with a really good game after that. I don't remember much what happened on that game because that was the same night this happened. But I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic that Texas will go into Kansas, It's basketball season now, so maybe they'll be focused there, and they won't have the same football focus they've had before. But
Lawrence in November, middle of a cold front, probably going to be snowing.
Well, and then so you hand it to the best 2 running backs in the country in rock and roll. So I feel pretty good about Texas this weekend.
Is Texas relying on? I mean, Bijan Robinson honestly is arguably the best running back in the country. Are you guys leaning on him enough?
No, I don't think so. And look, I think Sark outthought himself last week because the beginnings of what Bijan was able to do against TCU wasn't great. But we've all watched enough football to say you keep pounding it if it's close, because the third and fourth quarter, you'll start to pay dividends on what you did in the first 2. And it seems like it was run into the line of scrimmage, throw deep. That was the offensive plan. Andy?
So this is some of the weirdness of college football in 2022, is that programs, I'm not saying Texas does this necessarily, but I'm not saying they don't do it either. When they're recruiting the next guy, especially running backs who have NFL aspirations, they tend to want to sell to them that they're not going to get overused so they'll still have legs by the time they get to the NFL. And it has bitten some other teams. It's bitten Jimbo Fisher in the ass when he's trying to recruit running backs because it's perceived to be overused compared to some other teams. We're in the era of, the forward pass, but high-flying offenses that throw the ball downfield, that there's a lot of pass games, and running backs tend to be afterthoughts a lot. And I think Sark gets caught up in that some, that I want an offense that goes downfield because that's how you win games now. I also want to be able to recruit the next running back and tell him that, hey, we're going to give you the ball 20 times. You're going to have an NFL career. We're not going to kill you while you're here. And again, I don't know that Sark's doing that necessarily, but I feel like he is, and I feel like there's a lot of teams that do that now with running backs. And the NFL kind of has responded by basically saying, we don't value running backs either, because we'll take one in the first round every year, and then after that, they're all 4th and 5th rounders because it's just not a priority for us. Anybody can run the ball in the NFL.
Well, the game's changed so much at that level also.
But Andy, sorry, Scott, to pull you. Bijan had 12 carries last week.
Yeah.
It's silly. And I don't disagree. And that's, if I'm watching TCU Texas last week and nobody's catching the ball, but you have an all-world running back and a backup that's pretty darn good, why aren't you running the ball? It takes out that whole inability to catch part of the offense.
I mean, they ran the ball. They ran the ball 22 times as a team, and that's not a recipe for success.
Especially in cold weather, like we were talking about earlier. I mean, it TC, not to take anything away from TCU, but I do believe Texas game plan was not that great against TCU, and that helped limit you guys to the points you got. But we're hoping for the win this week in Kansas, not a repeat of last year, because we don't want people to lose their minds. We would like to see Texas fans, at least one of our fan bases, not lose their minds.
I don't know. I was happy for that walk-on fullback who got a NIL deal with Applebee's.
Who wouldn't? I mean, look, I'll take an NIL deal with Applebee's. Come on, are you kidding me? I'm
eating good in the neighborhood.
I'm eating good in the neighborhood. Andy, midnight yell practice tonight going to be pretty exciting because you're 33.5 point favorites over UMass. It's got to be a pretty good feeling tonight.
No, it's not. Let me tell you where the A&M fan base that is still able to articulate their feelings is at. I had a conversation with one of the other Aggies in my office on Monday, and
there's more than one of you. Ooh.
Yeah, he is at the point of, I was going to get mad at the game, but then I looked at my son and I realized what the important things are in life. So I just can't work up my emotions about A&M losing another game. And that's where we are as a fan base.
Y'all are at the cats in the cradle moment. Interesting.
100%. There are still a good portion of us that are angry and want to actually murder somebody, Mike Pence style. But the rest of us are kind of like, you can't hurt me anymore. I want to put my son in his A&M jersey and let him run around and not tell him about the bad things in life. That's what it is. This is
good as long as you have it's good as long as you have emotion, right? It's the apathetic stage. Once you reach that's whenever
it's an 11 o'clock game that's on streaming. We'll win and most of us will look at our phones and see, okay, we won. But then again, we lost to App State. Maybe we lose to UMass. I just don't know anymore. I have no idea what team we're rolling out. I have no idea who's healthy. I have no idea who's suspended. I don't know who's going to be wearing sleeves this week and not be able to play. It's just a whole. It's just kill us.
I do find it funny though, because Nick Saban and as we all know, Nick and Jimbo Fisher engaged in a war of words before the season about, you know, who's going to be the greatest, and neither one are. I love when years work out like that. Just personally, like, guys, get off your back. But anyway, listen, we're at the end of this week's episode. Guys, thanks so much for taking the time out to chat with me and remind me that you know, college football is fun, right? It's fun. It's gonna be
Are we having fun yet?
and everything's fine. Never mind the fact that I'm wearing my Blues shirt under this because, you know, they're on a 5-game winning streak. So I got that going for me after an 8-game losing streak. But anyway, we have the yell. Andy, anything you want to yell about?
It's so much, but not right now.
Jim, who fighting people in Kansas? Who are you fighting?
I still believe in Sark.
And I'm just going to say Sooie and Sam Pittman, please don't get out coached this week for the 3rd freaking week in a row. Please give us a fighting chance. Arkansas will beat Ole Miss this week. Lane Kiffin goes down in Fayetteville, and then he loses the game on Saturday too after he sends her home. Everybody have a great week, and we're going to end it right there. This is this week's episode of Yell, Fight, Sooie.
Y'all Fight Sooie is part of the Let's Get To network. Y'all Fight Sooie is produced by Twitchy Dolphin Media.